It seemed like there was resistance to that movie. There was like Hollywood resistance. People didn't like that you were making it.
There was a lot of opposition to it.
Joe Rogan is known for asking hard questions. But in one unexpected moment, he went silent, eyes wide, then glassy, as Mel Gibson revealed something no one saw coming. A hidden truth, buried beneath years of controversy. And now, finally spoken. It happened during what was supposed to be a casual conversation. Rogan had invited Gibson to talk about The Passion of the Christ, a film many remember but few truly understand. But as the talk unfolded, Gibson didn't just reflect on the film's impact. He opened up deeply personally, and what he shared pulled Rogan into a silence that said more than words ever could. Gibson explained that The Passion wasn't just a creative project, it was a calling. He felt driven, almost haunted by the need to tell the final hours of Jesus in a way that was raw, painful, and unfiltered. Not for awards, not for attention, but because he believed the world had forgotten the weight of what really happened on that hill outside Jerusalem. To craft the story, Gibson drew directly from Scripture, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But he didn't stop there. He wove in prophecies, psalms, and moments from across the Bible, building a layered portrait of love, betrayal, sacrifice, and redemption. Every scene, every word was chosen with intention, and it nearly broke him. As Gibson spoke, Rogan listened. And then, something shifted. The weight of the story, the conviction in Gibson's voice, the raw honesty, it all came crashing down in that small studio. Rogan's voice cracked. He wiped his eyes. And for a brief moment, the podcast host known for his boldness was left speechless. What did Gibson say that shook Rogan so deeply? Why did this particular confession stir such emotion both in the room and across the internet? The answer takes us beyond Hollywood, beyond film, into something spiritual, and perhaps something many of us have missed. Before we unpack that secret, let's return to the film itself. Let's look at what Mel Gibson faced just to bring this story to life. When Mel Gibson chose to direct The Passion of the Christ, he didn't walk into applause. He walked into fire. From the start, critics called it too much, too raw, too intense, too uncomfortable, and that's exactly why he made it. In a heartfelt conversation with Joe Rogan, Mel opened up about those early days, how doors closed, how industry insiders warned him to back down, how some accused him of using faith as a weapon, but Gibson wasn't trying to provoke. He was trying to show the truth, a truth too often softened, censored, or ignored. In Hollywood, religious films, especially Christian ones, have long been treated as niche or outdated. Gibson felt that double standard. He noticed how faith-based stories were often brushed aside, not for lack of meaning, but because they made people uncomfortable. Still, he didn't flinch. Coming from a deeply Catholic family, Gibson saw this project not as a career move, but as a calling, a mission. As production moved forward, so did the attacks. Critics tore it apart. Headlines mocked it. Even former allies distanced themselves. And yet Gibson pressed on, not with arrogance, but with quiet conviction. He believed the story of Jesus, his suffering, his sacrifice, his love was too important to water down, too sacred to keep hidden. So he kept going, even when funding disappeared, even when the backlash got personal, even when some called it career suicide. What kept him going wasn't anger, it was faith, and the belief that this story, this truth, was worth every battle. Mel Gibson knew one thing for certain: some stories demand to be told, even if they unsettle people, even if they stir anger, even if they cost you everything, because silence, he believed, can become its own form of betrayal. To most, the church is a place of peace, a refuge filled with stained glass and sacred hymns, a home for the broken, the hopeful, the faithful. But behind the rituals and incense, behind the sermons and golden altars, are shadows few dare to face, painful truths that have lived in whispers for decades. And for Mel Gibson, those truths hit too close to home. Raised in a Catholic household, Gibson grew up cherishing the church. It shaped his worldview, it shaped his soul. So when he learned of the betrayals within its walls, the weight of that knowledge broke something inside him. He spoke hesitantly but firmly about a dark legacy, not a rumor, not a theory, but a reality that involved names the world now knows. He mentioned Theodore McCarrick, Cardinal Wuerl, men who were entrusted with shepherding the faithful and yet helped shield abusers from justice. Worse still, it wasn't just a few individuals, it was systemic. a culture of cover-ups, denial, and quiet transfers. Children were hurt repeatedly while those in power stayed silent. Or worse, moved the predators somewhere new. Mel had once placed hope in Pope Francis. He wanted to believe the church could change from the top. But over time, even that hope dimmed. He spoke not with hatred, but disappointment. Francis, too, he said, had been accused of knowing more than he admitted, of protecting reputations instead of the vulnerable. For Gibson, the church had split in two. One half still held to the gospel love, truth, humility. The other had become a mask, an institution focused on image politics and power. He didn't say this to tear it down. He said it because he wanted it saved, reclaimed, restored. Then Gibson shared a curious detail from church history. During the 1950s papal conclave, the smoke that rose from the Vatican chimney wasn't clearly white or black. It was both. A swirl of confusion, as if even heaven was unsure. Some whispered of political games behind closed doors, of factions battling not just over theology, but power. When Pope John XXIII was elected, his choice of name raised eyebrows. It echoed a name once used by a man history now calls an imposter pope. Was it a coincidence or something deeper? Mel didn't offer conspiracy. He offered questions. Questions few dared to ask out loud. He reminded listeners that the Vatican isn't just a church. It's a nation, a sovereign entity with its own rules, laws, and silence. Within those walls, justice is complicated. Accountability is rare. He recalled cases where known abusers were quietly relocated, not punished. Not removed, just moved to new parishes where more innocent lives were shattered. One case involved over 100 children, and still, the priest was sent to another church to harm again. Mel didn't share these things to shock. He shared them because truth demands it. Because faith is not blind, and love, real love, refuses to stay silent when others are hurting. For Mel Gibson, confronting the corruption within the church wasn't just disappointing, it was heartbreaking. To see a place meant to offer peace, hope, and redemption fall prey to greed and silence. It wounded something personal, and yet he held on to what mattered most. He still believed in the heart of the gospel, in love, in forgiveness, in hope that rises even from the ashes. Acknowledging the past is painful, but it's also the first step toward healing. No institution, no matter how holy, is immune to human weakness. The only path forward is truth and the courage to change. When The Passion of the Christ finally hit theaters, it didn't arrive quietly. It struck like a thunderclap. The film wasn't just watched, it was felt, and it didn't leave anyone neutral. Some of the most respected voices in cinema praised what Gibson had created. Richard Corliss of Time magazine called it bold, raw, and deeply human. He acknowledged how difficult the film was to watch, but he also praised its sincerity, its commitment, its emotion. This wasn't a movie made to entertain. It was a film made to stir the soul, to provoke, to reveal. Armand White, another well-known critic, was struck by Gibson's transformation as a filmmaker. Known mostly for action epics, Gibson had turned inward, choosing to tell a story not of power, but of pain. White compared his work to that of Carl Theodor Dreyer, the Danish master of spiritual cinema. For White, The Passion wasn't just good, it was sacred art. Then came the voice of Roger Ebert, perhaps the most famous critic of all. He gave The Passion a rare 4-star review, not for its technical beauty, but for its emotional and spiritual impact. Ebert, though raised in a Christian household, admitted something deeply human. Until he saw the film, he never fully understood what the crucifixion meant. Not really, not viscerally. The movie didn't focus on Jesus' teachings. It didn't trace his miracles or explore his childhood. Instead, it did something far riskier. It took us to the center of the suffering, to the blood, to the silence, to the lonely hill where love gave everything. And in doing so, Ebert believed it captured the very core of Christianity, and it left him changed. But not all reactions were applause. Some scholars criticized Gibson for including elements that didn't come from scripture scenes that felt more poetic than factual. Questions arose. Was he adding legend? Was he rewriting history? Was he stepping beyond the text? But others rushed to his defense. They argued the film wasn't meant to be a documentary, it was a meditation, a reflection, a portrayal of spiritual truth, not academic detail. Gibson wasn't trying to educate, he was trying to awaken. Mel Gibson made one thing clear. His goal wasn't just to film the scriptures, it was to honor their spirit. Where the Bible left gaps, he used imagination, not to distort truth, but to reveal deeper meaning. One haunting example: the scene where Judas Iscariot, tormented by guilt, is pursued by eerie, childlike demons. It's not in the Bible, but it powerfully captures the spiritual decay, the inner collapse of a man who betrayed the Son of God. This wasn't just storytelling, it was a vision of what guilt does to the soul. Before the world ever saw the film, it was shown in the most sacred of places, Pope John Paul II's private residence. In December 2003, the Holy Father viewed the Passion of the Christ with one of his closest aides. He was reportedly moved deeply. A single quote attributed to him echoed across the world: "It is as it was." Though the Vatican never officially confirmed those words, the moment became part of the film's mythos. A quiet endorsement, a sacred nod. But not all reactions were reverent. Even before the movie's release, voices of concern rose from the Jewish community. Some feared the portrayal of Jewish leaders in the film would rekindle ancient, dangerous narratives, ones that falsely blamed the entire Jewish people for Jesus' death. These were not small fears. They were rooted in history, in centuries of persecution, in scars that still haven't fully healed. To address these concerns, a joint committee formed by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and the Anti-Defamation League reviewed the script in detail. Their statement expressed serious reservations. They pointed out that the film focused heavily on Caiaphas and a few religious leaders pressuring Pontius Pilate into the crucifixion. This narrative, they warned, mirrored the same version that once fueled hatred, pogroms, and violence across Europe. A version the Catholic Church had officially rejected during the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. A version many Protestant churches had since denounced. The committee worried that the Passion of the Christ might unravel decades of careful progress toward healing the fractured relationship between Christians and Jews. And yet, despite the backlash, the film struck a chord. Millions watched and wept. Some sat in silence, unable to speak. Others said they finally understood not just the suffering of Jesus, but the weight of what it cost. It sparked reflection on faith, on pain, on sacrifice. For some, it strengthened belief. For others, it opened long-closed questions. But nearly everyone walked away changed. Because this wasn't just a movie, it was an encounter. The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a movie, it was a moment. A cultural tremor that forced people across countries, religions, and generations to pause and reflect. It invited conversations about pain, history, faith power, and above all, compassion. It reminded us of humanity's darkest capabilities, but also of love's ability to redeem even the worst of it. And whether you praised it or protested it, one thing was undeniable. No one walked away from this film untouched. That maybe is its greatest legacy. But what many never saw was what happened off camera. The part of the story that never made it to the screen but moved Joe Rogan to tears when Mel Gibson finally shared it. Let's go behind the scenes of the Passion of the Christ. When filming began, few expected it to become the emotional storm it would turn into. But strange things started happening: accidents, injuries, and what some began to call miracles. Jim Caviezel was chosen to portray Jesus, and from day one it was clear this wasn't going to be a performance. It was going to be a trial. During the crucifixion scenes, the cross he carried wasn't a prop. It was real. 130 pounds. When it was placed on his shoulder, it dislocated instantly. The scream in that moment, it wasn't acting. It was agony. He didn't carry the cross all the way to Golgotha, but even the short distance was enough to leave lasting damage. Then came the scourging scene, the one that left audiences breathless. During filming, one of the Roman actors missed his mark. The whip struck Jim, not once but twice. The first blow knocked the wind out of him. The second tore open his hands. Blood, pain, grit, every frame captured something brutally honest. To bring this vision of Jesus to life, Jim also underwent a physical transformation. His nose was reshaped, his hairline altered, and his piercing blue eyes, often romanticized in paintings, were digitally turned brown. Mel Gibson didn't want a westernized Jesus. He wanted the most accurate representation possible. But then came the truly strange moments, unexplained things that made even the most skeptical stop and wonder. The assistant director Jan Michelini was struck by lightning, not once, twice, on set. And then during the crucifixion sequence, lightning struck again. This time it hit Jim Caviezel himself. Miraculously, he survived. Call it coincidence, call it divine. But for those who were there, it felt like something was watching, something bigger than all of them. Mel Gibson once said he didn't make this movie for the box office. He made it because he believed the world needed to remember not just the love of Christ, but the price he paid to prove it. And maybe that's why the film endures. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was honest. Painfully honest. And in that honesty, it offered something sacred. A mirror, a challenge, and for many, a chance to believe again. At first, Mel Gibson had a bold idea. He wanted the passion of the Christ to carry no music, only silence. Only the raw sounds of breath of pain, of footsteps on dust. He believed silence would let the truth scream louder. But eventually he changed his mind. And what followed was a score so haunting, so beautiful, that it was nominated for an Oscar in 2005. A remarkable honor, especially for a film surrounded by such fierce controversy. But perhaps the most unforgettable part of this film's legacy is not the awards, not the debates, but what happened in the hearts of the people who made it. Lives were changed, souls awakened. Take Luca Lionello. He played Judas, the man who betrayed Christ. Before filming, he was an atheist. No belief, no prayers, just lines to memorize. But something happened, something he couldn't explain. As he stepped deeper into the role, into the guilt, the torment, the pain, something in him shifted. By the time filming wrapped, Luca had given his life to Christ. The betrayer, redeemed. Then there was Maya Morgenstern, the actress who played Mary, the mother of Jesus. While portraying grief, she quietly carried new life. She hadn't told anyone. But one day in the middle of filming, she leaned close to Jim Caviezel and in her soft Romanian accent whispered, "I am expecting a baby." It was a moment of unscripted beauty. While she mourned a son on screen, she was nurturing a child within. A miracle hidden in plain sight. Mel Gibson often spoke of the strange events that took place during production, things that felt like more than coincidence. One story was about a little girl just 6 years old, part of the crew. She had epilepsy, 50 seizures a day. But after filming ended, she went an entire month without a single one. Her health improved, her smile returned, and her life forever changed. Others told of illnesses fading, hearing restored vision regained. Miracles, perhaps. But for those who lived them, they were moments of undeniable grace. There's one final image that Mel crafted with deep intention. A scene of Jesus taken down from the cross resting in his mother's arms. It was inspired by Michelangelo's Pietà, the sculpture in St. Peter's Basilica. Mary holding her son with grief carved into her face and strength holding him steady. Mel wanted that same essence, that mix of sorrow and eternal love to shine through the screen. And it did. That image stayed with people long after the credits rolled. Not just as art, but as truth. So what is the passion of the Christ really? It's not just cinema, not just storytelling. It's a journey of pain, of faith, of healing. Behind the cameras, something sacred unfolded. Actors broke, souls opened, and somewhere between the silence, the music, and the cross, people found peace. Maybe that's why this film still stirs hearts. Because in its suffering, we found love, and through its wounds, we remembered what it means to be saved. Yes, the film left scars, some seen, others hidden, but what it gave in return was far greater. It filled hearts with awe, comfort, and the unshakable feeling that something beyond human effort had moved among them. The journey was marked by hardship, accidents, small miracles, and quiet moments of grace that felt like whispers from heaven. For those who lived through it, The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a movie they helped make. It became a memory etched into their spirit, something sacred, something they would carry for life. During his talk with Joe Rogan, Mel Gibson said something that stirred new questions, a hint, a glimpse into what comes next. A new story, a new calling, not just about faith, but about the battle behind faith. The war between good and evil, hope and despair, light and darkness. For years, this story lived only in Mel's heart, but it kept growing deeper, wider, more urgent. Not a simple sequel, not just what happened next. This was different. This was the resurrection. Mel wanted to tell it in a way no one had ever told it before. Not in a clean chronological sequence, because life doesn't work that way. Faith doesn't either. To understand resurrection, you must understand loss. To grasp glory, you must first sit with grief. This story wouldn't just show what happened. It would explore why it matters, how it echoes through time into the lives of the apostles, the nations they touched, and the world we still live in today. Mel didn't do this alone. He joined forces with his longtime friend and brother in storytelling, Randall Wallace. Together, they wrestled with scripture pored over ancient texts, debated meaning, direction, tone. 6 years, maybe 7. And still the project demanded more, because they weren't just trying to recreate history. They were trying to open the soul of it. To Mel Gibson, the Gospels aren't myths. They're records, truths carved in time. And if you doubt them, he offers one thing to consider. Every apostle died for what they believed. Not for politics, not for fame, but for a man they saw alive after they had seen him dead. Who dies for a lie? Mel understands. Resurrection is a lot to accept. The idea that a man could be crucified, buried, and 3 days later walk out of a sealed tomb. It challenges logic. It stretches reason. But that's the nature of faith. It asks us to believe. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. For a long time, Mel Gibson believed what he was told, because that's what people around him believed. It was familiar, comfortable, expected. But as the years passed, something shifted. He began to ask deeper questions, not just about religion, but about purpose, truth, the battle within every soul. And step by step, through trial and silence and searching, he found his own answers. This next project isn't just a sequel. It's not just a retelling of something we've heard before. It's a re-seeing, a deeper dive into what resurrection really means, not just as an event in time, but as a call to the human heart. Mel wants this film to confront us, to ask hard questions, to stir something beneath the surface, not just in our minds, but in our spirit. What do we really believe? What do we stand for when no one is looking? And in the quiet war between good and evil, what part are we playing? This film isn't about fame. It's not about legacy or money. It's about meaning. Mel's hope is simple but profound. That when people watch this film, they don't just see a story. They feel it. They live inside it. He wants this to be more than a movie. He wants it to be a moment of awakening, a stirring of the soul. Because at the end of the day, we're all part of something bigger, something eternal. And even in the darkest moments, there is still hope. There is still light. There is still meaning. If this story moved you, if you believe the world needs more truth, more light, more stories that reach the heart, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this message. And if you're ready for more, click the next video on your screen. We'll be waiting for you there.